did me right in the candlelight. Oh, you say why? Why did you do a foolish thing like that? Oh, you say why? Why did you do a foolish thing like that? Oh, because I know you don't love me no more. Oh, yes, I know you don't love me no more. Oh, Lord, I know you don't love me no more. This is true. So I'm cheating on you. Oh, I'm cheating on you.
Melinda Rothouse is a professional creative. Professional creative is actually the easiest way to describe her because she does everything. She is a coach, she is a bass player, she is a writer, she is a podcaster. There's pretty much all of creativity that she touched in her lifetime in her work, and she has a PhD as well. So, you know, just a little smart and stuff. But she's the co-founder of Create, which offers creativity coaching and consulting, workshops and retreats. So you can talk to her about that afterwards. But she's also a professor. She's a teacher of creativity, innovation, and leadership within the Humanistic Psychology program at Saybrook University. Wouldn't we all love to know what it is to teach within the Humanistic Psychology program? We're going to get a glimpse in a moment here. And of course, she's the host and creator of the podcast I mentioned. It is also the same name as her book, Synchronate, Empowering Creativity. I mentioned the book. She's got two of them. One is called A Mindful Approach to Team Creativity and Collaboration. We'll have links to that and Synchronate in the email. It's also on the site right now. I mentioned she's a musician. She's a singer-songwriter as well as a bass player. She practices mindfulness, meditation, and contemplative arts, as well as, you know, just doing photography too. Like I said, multi-hyphenate creative, right? Well, it's great because she has spent a lot of time thinking about and exploring today's theme, and here to share her thoughts on the intersection of creativity and ritual, please welcome Melinda Rothouse. Welcome. Love it.
I'm just thrilled to be here in this incredible space today. And to follow the Soul Supporters, amazing. Let's give it up for them one more time. Yeah. So our theme today is ritual. But I'm curious first to hear from you, what comes to mind when you hear the word ritual? Habits. Steady practice.
Self-love.
Self-love, beautiful. I love that. Ceremony, great. Okay, good. You guys are ahead of the curve because I think that a lot of people, when they think of ritual, they think of sort of empty rituals or going through the motions, things like that. But I'm here to, say today that we can be very creative in our ritual practices. So Brian gave a great definition of ritual at the beginning, and I had one that I found that, again, kind of emphasizes, the creative possibilities of ritual. So I'm going to say more about that shortly, but first, I would like to take you on a little experience, if you are willing to join me. So if you feel comfortable closing your eyes for a moment, I invite you to do so. Or you could just take a soft gaze a few feet in front of you. And in your mind's eye or ear or kinesthetic sense, not all of us see with our mind's eye, so being inclusive here. Just take yourself to a place that is soothing and comfortable for you. Maybe a place in nature, or just a favorite spot that feels welcoming. And just noticing all the sensory details, imagining yourself there in that place. What do you see? What do you smell and hear? How does it feel? And in the distance, you begin to notice a figure walking toward you. As the figure gets closer, you begin to realize that this is your future self. And your future self arrives and sits down across from you. And they have a message for you. Something about your future path, your creative work, a question about where to go next. Just notice, are there any words, images, colors, sounds? This might be a non-verbal transmission, a feeling. Just taking a moment to receive that message about your future path, your creative work. What's next? And see if you can just really feel that. Receive it. Thank them for this message, whatever it may have been. And if you didn't get anything, that's totally fine too. Thank them for this message. And as you return to this room, to this space, you're stepping through a doorway toward that future self. Slowly coming back into this room, this moment together. And taking a moment, if you like, to jot down the details of this message. If you've got your phone, you could take a note, however you might want to record that. We'll be returning to this at the end of the talk. So coming back, hello again. Anyone care to share a little bit about what they received? Audrey.
I've been doing a lot of inner child work, and my 20 years from now self came and said that I am the like inner child right now too to her, and like she's like the way I feel about how I show up for my 6-year-old self is how she feels showing up for me now. And it was kind of nice to remember that I'm still like my younger self right now.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Yeah, so we carry that inner child with us throughout our journey. Beautiful. Anyone else? Yeah.
I had something similar to Audrey where that I just turned 34 on Saturday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. But I've been having a hard time with that. And I saw my future self come to me and say, you're still so young and there's so much good stuff ahead of you. And it just felt really good and really, really calming.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. We have so much anxiety around age and aging, right? But to my mind, it's all about our state of mind. Yeah. Thank you so much. Okay, beautiful. So I want to talk a little bit about how rituals function. So rituals mark time, space, and transition. And they are actually about change and transformation. So think of different life milestones that you go through. We sometimes talk about these as rites of passage. So coming of age ceremonies, graduations, weddings, funerals. They all mark the transition from one state of being to another. And of course, Creative Mornings itself is a form of ritual. Ben and Brian sometimes talk about this space being sort of church for creatives and the rituals that go along with that. Again, ritual can be dynamic and creative. So the anthropologist Victor Turner and a predecessor of his, Arnold van Gennep, kind of mapped out the stages of ritual. And generally, when we go through a ritual, there's 3 major stages. There's a separation, then a transition of some sort, and then a return or reintegration. So in many traditional societies, in a coming of age ritual, for example, the young people would be sort of taken away outside of the community to a separate space and go through some sort of ritual ceremony, maybe an ordeal of sorts, a vision quest, whatever it might be. And that's that transitional period, which we talk about liminality, being betwixt and between, neither here nor there. Sometimes when I'm on an airplane, I feel like I'm in a very liminal space. You know, you leave from one place, and then you're sort of nowhere, and then you arrive in a completely different space. So there's that sense of liminality or transition, and then we return to the community changed in some way. And then there's a reintegration of this new iteration, this new self, this new state of being. So just imagine a beautiful image of a labyrinth in the slides above me. So walking a labyrinth is another type of ritual. So how many here have walked a labyrinth, actually? Okay, quite a few. And there are several publicly accessible labyrinths around Austin if you're curious to check it out. So walking a labyrinth is a contemplative practice that we see in different spiritual traditions. And it's different from a maze in that there's only one way in and one way out. There are different patterns that a labyrinth can take, but basically we're not going in a linear straight line. We're sort of curving around and curving back on ourselves, often starting with some sort of intention, and then we walk through the labyrinth to the center, and then we come back out the way we came, and there's some sense that we're planting a seed of our intention, or perhaps we're wrestling with a question or a life challenge. We can use the labyrinth walk as a way to kind of process that in a different kind of way. So I also often emphasize that creativity is a journey through the wilderness. There's no map for it. So although we might try to understand the stages of the creative process, for each of us, it's different, and every time we engage in it, it's different. So we have to kind of, I think, become familiar or become comfortable with the uncertainty of this journey through the wilderness. One of the metaphors that I like, there's a Jungian psychologist, Robert Romanishin, and he likens the creative journey to the Orphic descent into the underworld. For those of you familiar with the Orpheus myth, Orpheus loses his wife, Eurydice, and goes down into the underworld to sort of ask for her return. And Hades and Persephone grant this return on one condition, that he cannot turn around and look at her or see her until they've both passed the threshold into the upper world. And of course, what does he do? At the last minute, he turns around and loses her forever. And then later, he goes on to be dismembered by a frenzy of Bacchanalian women and so on and so forth. And so the idea is that, you know, at some point in the creative process, we have to go down into the abyss. Has anyone experienced the creative abyss before? Yeah. Okay. So I see this as actually a part of the creative process, not an anomaly, but actually we get to a place, we have an idea, we have a vision, we're so excited about it, we start taking action toward it, and at some point we just get stymied, we get stuck, we experience blockages of all kinds, or self-doubt. Who am I to engage in this project? You know, what was I ever thinking to start this? I experienced this with my dissertation when I was sitting with a pile of data that I was supposed to be analyzing, and I just thought, what am I doing? But fortunately, I had read this book, which is called The Wounded Researcher, based on the wounded healer archetype. And so I knew that this was part of the process. And so I just sort of tried to surrender to it. You know, so creativity is not a linear process. It's messy. It's chaotic. It comes in fits and starts, right? So learning to understand and be comfortable to some extent with that can help us move through those creative blockages. I also often talk about creativity, individuation, and the hero's journey. So individuation in Jungian psychology is the journey to wholeness that we all undertake throughout the lifetime. And kind of my theory here is that we can use our creativity to make meaning of our experiences, particularly the challenging ones, the traumatic ones. And that helps us kind of evolve on that journey to wholeness. And then I'm sure many of you are familiar with Joseph Campbell and the idea of the hero's journey. And so there's a quote from our book, Syncreate, which is kind of a guide to the creative process as much as that's possible. Creativity is an alchemical process in that we will be challenged, disoriented, and transformed. It begins with a call to adventure, as Joseph Campbell terms the start of the hero's journey. It's what powers our creative impulses. Often, when receiving the call, it's tempting to resist it, which is also a natural part of the process. As we embark, we encounter many challenges, as well as helpers and guides to assist us. Then, inevitably, at some point, we also reach the abyss, the proverbial dark night of the soul, in which we question everything, seeing no way forward. Paradoxically, this stage often marks the gateway to transformation, or the creative breakthrough, allowing us to bring our work into the world. So if we can sit in that place, the Jungians also kind of liken it to this sort of, you know, deep sea night journey, you know, where we've sort of lost the plot, right? And if we can actually sit in that space using whatever practices or rituals that are available to us, meditation, mindfulness, whatever that might be, if we can actually stay in that uncomfortable place, often there's some breakthrough that arrives. You know, so in my own creative process, sometimes I start to feel this like creative malaise or boredom, or, you know, a friend was just saying to me the other day, I'm just not feeling inspired, you know, and she's in grad school, and like, well, it's a slog what you're doing, and maybe you just need a break. So sometimes it's just taking a break and stepping away. We call this incubation in the creative process. And then we can perhaps return. But I personally find when I'm in that creative malaise or boredom, if I can just stay with it rather than trying to push through or force myself to do something, a shift happens eventually, and I get an idea, or I talk to a friend, or I hear a song, or something happens that helps me kind of move forward and pick that thread up again. So we can use ritual and this idea that our creativity is actually sacred and can be ceremonial, as someone said earlier, and deliberately, intentionally create rituals and routines around our creative practice. This helps to develop discipline and habit. So we know that, sometimes inspiration strikes, sometimes it doesn't. But basically, you got to get your butt in the chair or behind the drum kit or whatever it is so that you can create the conditions for the muse to arrive, as it were. You're not always going to feel inspired. So this provides a sense of grounding, kind of an anchor point, a daily or regular practice. And this could include things like lighting a candle, making a cup of tea, doing some mindfulness, playing particular music. We have morning pages from The Artist's Way, Julia Cameron. These are all ways to ritually kind of set ourselves up for our creative work. I would just caution about the lighting a candle part. Another Jungian psychologist, Dennis Slattery, gave a very inspiring talk. At one point, he was talking about how he would light a candle to Hestia, the goddess of the hearth and home, before he would go into his writing sessions. And so I was like, oh, that's a good idea. I'm going to try that. I got my candle, and I had my laptop, and got my tea, and I was all ready to roll. And, I had my laptop open. Well, I realized later that I had burned the top of my laptop, which was sitting right on over the candle. So don't do that. Be careful with your rituals. Also, ritual really is cemented in the body and in physicality. So ways that you can incorporate movement into your rituals. There's something about your body being involved. And if you think about different rituals, there's often a physical component to them. So I'm curious, what are some of your personal, I overheard some people in the audience earlier talking about this. What are some of your personal rituals around your creativity? A morning run. Okay, perfect. Get in the coffee. That's a big one. Yep. Hannah?
I do light a candle.
Light a candle.
I meditate, and then I journal, and then I have my tea.
Candle, meditation, journal, tea. I love it. Yeah, I find it helpful to have some kind of morning creative routine. I do something similar. I have my coffee. I do some meditation. I try not to schedule anything if I can help it before 9:30 or 10 a.m. I know we don't all have that luxury, but so these rituals are very helpful for kind of getting us into the groove. Some other ways are working with images and archetypes. So a lot of people like to read cards and pick a card perhaps for the day, or working with a guiding archetype in their creative practice. So that can be very helpful. Also, I was talking with Mike, my podcast producer, about this the other day, and he was speaking about the value of revisiting previous work, which I think is so great because, often we write something or we create something and we're not really sure about it and kind of, I don't know. But then we come back to it later. If we put it away, we can come back with fresh eyes and actually appreciate, oh, that's not so bad. I see where I need to go with this. So again, the importance of occasionally stepping away and then revisiting the work. And in my kind of research for this talk, I was looking up ritual and creativity, and I found in the Journal of Ritual Studies from 2014 this quote, which I love, which is, "The self-conscious crafting of new rituals or the reinterpretation of existing ones with the expressly subversive purpose of bringing about social change." Okay, so ritual can be transformative. I want to talk a little bit about our Syncreate book that Ben mentioned. It's a guide to the creative process, and it focuses on kind of three main stages. This is a book I co-wrote with my business partner, Charlotte Gulick, And we did some informal research prior to writing the book about what are the main obstacles that creatives face. We kind of boiled it down to 3 questions. Number 1, how do I start? Number 2, what do I do next? And number 3, how do I finish? And so our sort of model of the creative process takes this into account. How do I start? Play. What do I do next? Plan. And how do I finish? Produce. So play is all about ideation. You know, it's that like typically right brain, you know, daydreaming, fantasizing, letting our minds run free. And then the second stage, which may seem paradoxical, is about planning. So we talk about convergent and divergent thinking in the creative process. Divergent being associative, you know, again, imagination, making connections between things. But we also need convergent thinking, which is like getting our shit together and actually doing the thing, right? It's that more linear, left brain way of being, and we actually need both in the creative process to bring anything to completion. And then produce is when we're actually drafting and iterating and polishing the work, maybe sharing it with people, getting feedback, and then bringing it finally out into the world. So also want to give a little plug for the podcast, which is also called Create, Empowering Creativity. And in the podcast, we're looking at the connections between creativity, psychology, and spirituality. So we share stories of the creative process, usually culminating with a creativity pro tip that you can kind of run with and try on your own. And again, shout out to Mike Osborne, my producer, who's really mentored me in the process of creating and producing a podcast. And if you're thinking of doing the same, please reach out to him, 14th Street Studios. And if anyone here is interested in being a guest or you know someone, please reach out to me after the talk. And I want to draw particular attention to episode 30, which we did with Ben and Brian about Creative Mornings Austin. So I want to close with a few questions or kind of prompts for you to take with you as you go about your day. So thinking about how do you connect with your own creative spirit? Where and how do you find inspiration? And how can you intentionally cultivate through ritual, ceremony, intentionally cultivate those experiences so that they can happen more often? So connecting with your creative spirit, finding inspiration. And then finally, what's one specific action you can take today to move toward your creative goals? So recall the message from your future self. What is one action that you can take now, today, to move toward that future self? And as you walk out of the building today, as you cross the threshold, you are taking a step on that journey. If you'd like to get in touch, I'd love to connect with you. You can find me at melindarothouse.com. Syncreate, syncreate.org for the podcast and the book. I'm on social media, Melinda-ZG on Instagram. Thank you so much.
Let's give it up one time for Melinda.
Yeah, absolutely.